I'm starting a new series. We certainly aren't going to deal with it all tonight, but the Cape of Good Hope. Hope for the future. People ask, is there hope for the future? And is independence for the Cape viable? And what can we do to work for free and independence at Cape of Good Hope? 5 months from now, we will be having municipal elections. That's very significant and important if we're interested in building a free and independent Cape of Good Hope. Is there hope for the Cape? We all know the refrain from the Exodus, let my people go. So Moses and Aaron came into Pharaoh and said to him, thus says the Lord God of the Israelites, how long will you refuse to humble yourself before me? Let my people go that they may serve me. I don't know how many people recognize the fact that the state of Israel was the result of secession from Egypt. And I've had people come to me and say, yes, but where's the biblical basis for secession? Well, one of the most famous events in the Old Testament, the Exodus. The nation of Israel grew out of secession from Egypt. In the Bible, a nation is an ethno-linguistic people group of a shared faith. The scriptures make it clear that the Hebrews remained Hebrews. Even after 480 years in Egypt, they never became Egyptians. That's significant. Because today, the whole attitude is, well, a nation is a geographic accident. I mean, whoever happens to be there, even if they're diverse in religion, belief, worldview, culture, language, everything like that, that doesn't matter. And so they've mixed up the idea of what a nation is. But we are not geographic accidents, we're demographic descendants. In 1 Kings 12, we read of the secession of the 10 northern tribes from the United Kingdom of Israel. There were 3 kings of the United Kingdom of Israel. King Saul, King David, and King Solomon. That is the period of the United Kingdom. And that United Kingdom was divided when Solomon's son Rehoboam foolishly dismissed the wise counsel of the elders who had stood before his father Solomon. Instead, Rehoboam chose to rather listen to the irresponsible advice of the young men who had grown up with him. As a result, he arrogantly dismissed the petition of his subjects, and he threatened to tax them even heavier and burden them with even more oppressive laws than they'd ever experienced before. Now, Solomon could have justified some of this taxation. We need all this to build the temple. And the temple was magnificent. It was the most magnificent building in the world. And maybe there was some justification, sacrifice to build the temple. But once the temple was built, it's not like the taxes suddenly went down. Now it started going to opulence of the government. And now, after all they'd been taxed under Solomon, which was already grievous, they're told by his son Rehoboam, I'm going to tax you even worse. Now, when all Israel saw that the king did not listen to them, the people answered the king, saying, what share have we in David? We have no inheritance in the son of Jesse. To your tents, O Israel. Now see to your own house, O David. So Israel departed to their tents. So Israel has been rebellion against the house of David. There was none who followed in the house of David but the tribe of Judah only. Although Benjamin actually did join him later. But the 10 northern tribes now became the northern kingdom of Israel, and the southern was called Judah. When King Rehoboam assembled 180,000 warriors to fight against the house of Israel to restore the United Kingdom, God stopped them, declaring this secession was of him. But the word of God came to Shemaiah, the man of God, the prophet, saying, speak to Rehoboam, the son of Solomon, king of Judah, to all the house of Judah and Benjamin, and to the rest of the people, saying, thus says the Lord, you shall not go up, nor fight against your brethren, the children of Israel. It's pretty categoric. Let every man return to his house, for this thing is from me. What thing? The secession, the division, the ending of the United Kingdom, the creation of 2 kingdoms, northern kingdom of Israel, southern kingdom of Judah. This is of me. Therefore they obeyed the word of the Lord, and they turned back according to the word of the Lord. And instead of there being a civil war, there was a peaceful acceptance that this secession was God's will. Interesting. And so after that, Israel goes into the northern kingdom with the capital in Samaria, and the southern kingdom, Judah, with the capital in Jerusalem. The scripture emphasizes that all the families of the nations of the earth are to sing the praises of the Creator in every language and tongue. So Revelation 5 verse 9 says, and they sang a new song saying, you are worthy to take the scroll and to open its seals, for you were slain. And you have redeemed us to God by your blood out of every tribe and tongue and people and nation. Now, isn't it interesting? Here we are in heaven. And in heaven, there's still a distinction of every tribe, every language, every nation, every people. And yet the people here on earth who are trying to say that these distinctions don't matter. But these distinctions are significant enough to be mentioned in heaven as part of the glory of God, the diversity of the kingdoms that have submitted to Christ. A nation is an ethno-linguistic people group of a shared faith. Now I say that as a missiologist. This is basic missions 101. You can't just look at the map and say, oh, there's 222 countries in the world. We have a missionary in China, right? That's China. We have a missionary in India, good. Well, there's 1 billion people in India. There's 1,300 language groups in Indonesia. There are 480 language groups in Nigeria. There's 144 languages and tribes in Sudan. There's 50 different language groups in the Nuba Mountains, which is an area not even bigger than Scotland. So as missionaries, we have to think in terms of every ethno-linguistic people group. We can't just think in terms of countries. But unfortunately, many people today confuse country. Country and nation is often used synonymously. But as a world Christian, as a missions-minded Christian, we need to be distinguishing between that's a country, it's not a nation. So unfortunately, many today are confused, very confused, about the concept of nations. And this could be because there's a group of state representatives in New York calling themselves the United Nations. Now, they're neither united nor nations, but of course, most of them have absolutely no legitimacy at all. The United Nations is the largest collection of unelected dictators, mass murderers, drug traffickers, human traffickers on the planet. Most of them are actually just gangsters with flags and self-awarded medals, by the way. The United States deludes itself that it's one nation, under God, indivisible. Now, to say that America is under God would be a good commitment, but one nation, indivisible? Why 50 states in a voluntary union should be considered indivisible seems incomprehensible to most of us. Yet Americans are expected to make this pledge on a regular basis. And by the way, this pledge was brought in, I think, under the Eisenhower administration, 1950s. And one wonders why they suddenly needed to put the word indivisible in. Abraham Lincoln waged a ruinous war, the worst war in American history. More Americans died in the war between the states than Americans have died in every other war they fought combined. Over 650,000 people died to preserve the Union, which was meant to be a confederation. Since that war between the states concluded in 1865, America has become more and more centralized, with central government overruling state governments on such matters as legalized abortion and state-mandated education. And I might say that there's an excellent film that's just been released this year, in April in America, Roe v. Wade, which we're planning to show in a preview for those who are interested at, it's going to be, I think, Tuesday the 8th of June. We're inviting pro-lifers who are interested in previewing it so that they can then help promote to get it into the cinemas in the country. So, how abortion was legalized in America is by a group of criminal deceivers, deceiving and lying and putting lie upon more lie. And in fact, this Roe v. Wade, which is told from the perspective of a person who is at the epicenter of it, the head of NARAL, the National Association for the Repeal of Abortion Legislation, Dr. Bernard Nathanson, an abortionist who killed 70,000 babies as an abortionist, who organized the whole scam, admitted he lied about everything and sucked out of his thumb the statistics they were using on the evening news, and that it was known by the media that they were lying, but they were doing it for a good cause, they believed. And this was the central government telling all the local governments in America, 36 states in America had abortion as illegal, like Texas. And now the federal government came and said, you can't make laws protecting babies in your own state. Now, that's a result of Lincoln. By the way, this picture is interesting. Do you recognize the character standing there? That's Fidel Castro, the cigar smoker himself. Uncle Fidel is coming here to lay a wreath on behalf of the Communist Party of Cuba before the idol of Lincoln in this temple. In this temple, as in the hearts of the people, for whom he saved the Union. The memory of Abraham Lincoln is enshrined forever. I mean, saved, hearts, forever, temple. Seriously, religious terminology here. But just reminding us of the fact that Abraham Lincoln is a patron saint of the Communist Party of the United States of America and of the Communist Party of Cuba and many other places too. He's much prized, and he was a correspondent and friend of Karl Marx, and they correspond. Karl Marx was very supportive in defending what Abraham Lincoln was doing because it totally fitted in with his goals. At any rate, that's another story for another day. But when the Soviet Union, the USSR, broke up in 1991, it was considered a good thing. And there was a lot of rejoicing as Latvia and Lithuania and Estonia and Ukraine and Belarus and Armenia and Georgia and many other nations seceded from the Union, the Soviet Union. It's a good thing for freedom that the Soviet Union was not indivisible, because there's a multiplicity of nations in what is now the Russian Federation and the 15 different republics that have grown out of them. Even National Geographic, speaking about the peoples of the Soviet Union, showed the different tribes and languages and races and nationalities. And you can see they even had a tribe of astronauts living in the Soviet Union there. And so now there's 15 countries where there used to be one indivisible Soviet Union. And that's a good thing. It's a very good thing. And Russia is the stronger for it, that it's not ruling a massive empire that includes all these countries like Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan and Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan. Why not let them go free and separate? Some of the most successful countries in the world are the results of secession. Exhibit A, Switzerland, seceded from Austria in 1291. Now, you all should know of the story of William Tell. Their independence was inspired by the expert marksmanship of William Tell, who was a real person. He refused to bow before the hat of Albert Gesler, which was raised on a pole in the market square of Altdorf. And when William Tell refused to humble himself in front of this leader, Gesler's cruel wrath mixed with curiosity to test William Tell's legendary marksmanship with his crossbow, ordered him to shoot an apple off his son's head with a crossbow bolt. I mean, what a disgusting, cruel punishment to any father. And yet, so good was William Tell with his crossbow that he could dare to do it, and he succeeded in splitting the apple with his arrow, saving the life of both his son and himself. And then Gesler asked, "Why have you ready 2 arrows?" Because after shooting the one, well, it's not an arrow, it's actually a bolt. Hence the term, you've shot your bolt. Crossbow shoot bolts. And William Tell stated, "If I'd missed with the first, I would not have missed with the second in your own heart." And Gesler was enraged and considered that to be insubordination, sedition or something. And he is arrested and taken by boat across Lake Lucerne to Kuznach, where he would spend the rest of his life in a dungeon. Now, a fierce storm enabled William Tell to get close enough to the shore that he escaped, taking his crossbow with him, where he later ambushed and killed Gesler with an arrow. And this launched the young Confederacy secession from Austrian rule. The first 3 cantons which formed the Swiss Confederation in 1291 were Schwyz, Uri, and Unterwalden. The oldest republic in the world, Switzerland, now consists of 26 cantons, sovereign, independent microstates. And when I hear friends of mine in America saying things like, "America's the oldest republic in the world," I say, "Have you not heard of Switzerland?" When I hear people saying, "America's the freest country that ever was or is in the world today," and I say, "You should visit Switzerland. They're a lot freer than you are." And there's a lot of things that the people in America seem to think that they're the oldest, the greatest, and all the rest. But interestingly enough, at the beginning of the First World War, the American military intelligence sent a major to do a study of Europe because they thought we might get involved in this war. And the report came back famously that the French army trained their riflemen at 40 yards range. The targets were 40 yards away from the rifleman. 40 yards. The English army trains at 100 yards. A lot better than the French. The German army trains at 300 yards. The Swiss army trains at 400 yards. And he said, that's basically it. The Germans will beat the French and British easily, but nobody can beat the Swiss. I mean, that was just speaking in terms of plain musketry and soldiering skill. You can imagine it's a whole lot easier to target 40 yards than it is at 400. And that's the difference between the French and the Swiss. That's a 1,000% difference in the distance you're expecting your marksman to aim at. Despite Switzerland occupying the crossroads of Germanic and Romish Europe, as reflected in their linguistic and cultural regions, they've got Germans, that's the majority, they've got French, they've got Italians, they've even got Romansk. Its confederal, decentralized, direct democracy policy of armed neutrality enabled Switzerland to stay out of ruinous world wars, when all the countries around them were killing one another by the millions in the First and Second World War. Switzerland stayed an island of peace in a continent often torn apart by war, by decentralized government structure. Other successful secessions, think of Holland, Netherlands. A lot of people in South Africa came from Netherlands. Netherlands was a colony of Spain until just a few years before Jan van Riebeeck came to the Cape. Led by Prince William of Orange, the Netherlands seceded from Spain beginning in 1568. They finally won their freedom by 1648, just 4 years before Cape Town was founded. Another country that started from secession is the United States of America. The USA seceded from Great Britain in 1776, demanding their chartered rights as Englishmen under Magna Carta, the Great Charter of 1215. The 13 colonies constituted themselves as the United States of America, with the Declaration of Independence, 4th of July, 1776. Now, it should be noticed that right up till the war between the states, the United States of America always was described as the United States of America are. Because it's not the United States of America, it's the United States of America. The United States of America are. After Lincoln's victory, it became the United States of America is. It moved from a confederation to being a federal system where it's basically one centralized government, which is not the way the founders envisaged it. Well, going back to 1776, the founding fathers of the United States maintained that as the English government had failed to protect them and to provide for their rights, as guaranteed by Magna Carta of 1215, they were absolved of their allegiance to the British government in London. Now, this is all part of Lex Rex. The law is king, and In Defense of Liberty Against Tyrants by Junius Brutus, books that were well known and well quoted from at that time. As the king owes allegiance to the King of Kings, we owe allegiance to the king. But if the king is in rebellion to the King of Kings, we must not join him in his rebellion to God. Now, government is a contract. We give the government allegiance and taxes and service in the military and so on. They give us protection. Now, if the government fails to serve and to protect its citizens, the citizens are alleviated of any obligation of loyalty to government. If the government won't keep their side of the contract, then we don't need. For example, if you have to pay rates and taxes, then the government must fix the roads and see the electricity and the plumbing and everything works, and they've got to protect you from crime and all that. Now, if the government fails to do that, why are we paying our rates and taxes? And so you get tax revolts. And this is all part of the kind of principle which is spelled out in Magna Carta, Lex Rex, In Defense of Liberty Against Tyrants, and which the Americans asserted with their War of Independence against Great Britain in 1776 and following. Belgium seceded from Netherlands in 1830. Originally, Netherlands included what today is Belgium, which is why probably Afrikaans is so much closer to Vlaams, which is in Belgium, than Netherlands. And it could be that Afrikaans is more Afrika-Vlaams, because you go to Belgium today and you hear a person speaking Vlaams, you will be able to understand them and communicate to them quite well. A fair bit harder in the Netherlands, although there's similarities. Texas seceded from Mexico in 1836. Remember the Alamo. The Battle of the Alamo in 1836 was a pivotal event in the War of Independence for Texas. and the cruelty and arbitrary lawlessness of President Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna. I've always found it amazing when you come across a spur in Cape Town called the Santa Anna Spur. Do they not know who Santa Anna was? He's not exactly the good guy. You know, you might as well have the Mao Tse-tung Spur or something. It's just, Santa Anna was bad, very bad. I mean, and here you've meant to have this Texan-like Spur restaurant, and you've got one called the Santa Anna. Well, this led to other Texans rising up and defeating the Mexican army at the Battle of San Jacinto, 21st April 1836, securing the independence of Texas from Mexico. So Texas seceded from Mexico, and they are the one state in the Union of the United States that made a provision as well when they joined expressly. They have the right to secede at any time, and a lot of them are thinking this is a good idea at the moment. Nicaragua seceded from Guatemala in 1838. Norway seceded from Sweden in 1905. I mean, that's a lifetime of my grandfather. It's not that long ago. In fact, very recently, there was Norway celebrating its 100th anniversary of their country, becoming an independent country. Prince Carl of Denmark was unanimously elected king by the Norwegian parliament, the first king of a fully independent Norway in over 500 years. He took the name of Håkon VII. Now, Håkon was one of the great Vikings who, therefore, many descendants, many other kings were named Håkon. A national referendum confirmed the people's preference for a monarchy over a republic, and a peaceful separation of Norway from Sweden was effected 7th of June, 1905. Finland seceded from Russia in 1917. If you know your dates, you'll recognize something was going on in 1917. It was the Bolshevik Revolution that tore Russia apart, and the Finns set up their own parliament and declared themselves independent from Russia on the 6th of December 1917. They seceded from chaos and from communism. You will notice all the Viking countries have crosses in their flags. It's a testimony to the conversion of the Vikings, that they, some of the most bloodthirsty people in the history of the world, how they were tamed and civilized by the gospel. The Republic of Ireland seceded from Great Britain in 1922. And it's a fact that Ireland today is divided between Northern, or Protestant Ireland, and Southern Republic of Ireland. Northern Ireland is monarchist, unionist, believe in being united to the United Kingdom, where Southern Ireland are Republican and they're Catholic. And so again, you've got a secession based on religion, probably primarily, in the fact that the Catholics in Ireland did not want to be part of a Protestant Britain. And the Protestants in Northern Ireland did not want to be part of a Catholic Southern Ireland Republic. And in fact, there were two secessions. Ireland seceded from Britain, and Britain was happy to give the whole of Ireland, north as well, away. And the Northern Irish Protestants had to fight to stay in the Union. I mean, that's a strange form of civil war, but they were fighting Britain to stay in the Union, just as Southern Ireland was fighting to get out of it. So they both seceded in different ways. The whole of Ireland seceded from Britain, and then Northern Ireland seceded from Southern Ireland to stay part of Britain. Pakistan seceded from India in 1947. As the British started to leave India, millions of people migrated. The Muslims moved to Pakistan, and Hindus moved out of Pakistan into India, and millions died in the wars of that secession. That was a very bloody mess, literally. One of the worst secessions in history, very badly done, very sloppily and badly executed indeed. Well, Bangladesh, which was East Pakistan, later seceded from West Pakistan, which is now understood as Pakistan. And you could imagine it's not really workable. You had the Muslims grouped in Pakistan East and Pakistan West, and now you've got Bangladesh separate from Pakistan. Taiwan, this island off the coast of mainland China, seceded from China in 1949. As the communists seized control on mainland China, the nationalists seceded from mainland China. Now, not that mainland China accepts it, and right now there's a lot of bullying and attempts to pressure them, but right now Taiwan is one of the richest, most effective free market economies in the world. In fact, our mission has had many a Bible printed in Taiwan because they print them cheaper, more effectively, and so on, than we can get done in Africa at 1/5 the price. Singapore, which is also a place we've regularly got Bibles printed because they can undercut everyone else in cost, they seceded from Malaysia in 1965. Now, Singapore was just a swamp. Malaya became independent in 1957 from Britain, became Malaysia when it incorporated Sarawak and Sabah, but then Singapore peacefully seceded from Malaysia in 1965. And Singapore was a very unpromising swamp, and it was turned into one of the most potent economic powerhouses in Asia. I haven't been there, but Lenora has, and she said it's clean, efficient, well run, and it's a phenomenal example. So much so that Helen Ziller got into great trouble when she pointed out that Singapore used to be a colony and they're not whinging about it. They're just getting ahead with free market and they're doing much better than we are. And why can't we follow? And, I thought she'd commit the unforgivable sin by mentioning something like that. But what she said was common sense and true in reality. Most people forget that Namibia was an integral part of South Africa. It was our fifth province. We'd played provincial rugby and all the rest of it between it. And Namibia seceded from South Africa in 1990. And actually, they're doing better than we are. On any level you want to look at, it's a lot more stable a country, a lot lower crime rate and all the rest of it. So Namibia is doing well, and Namibia's got a fraction of the population the Western Cape has. Now, as a missionary for over 39 years, who's concentrated on serving persecuted Christians in restricted access countries, I've traveled in 42 countries and I've worked in 38 countries across 4 continents. And this included throughout Eastern Europe, behind the Iron Curtain during the Cold War, everywhere from Poland and East Germany and north through Czechoslovakia and Hungary and Romania and Bulgaria and through Yugoslavia down to Albania. So I got to see Eastern Europe even before the Iron Curtain came down. There never was such a concept as Czechoslovakia or Yugoslavia before the vindictive, destructive Versailles Treaty of 1919. And those entities do not exist today either. They were bad ideas from the beginning. Free and independent nations have broken away from those empires. Yugoslavia, meaning the land of the South Slavs, included Slovenia and Croatia, definitely not Slavic, but were formerly part of Austrian culture, and the Austrian Empire with Germanic language and culture. However, this fragile political entity called Yugoslavia was composed of 6 republics, 5 nationalities, 4 languages, 3 major religions, 2 alphabets, but only 1 political party, the Communist Party under Bronze Tito from 1945 to 1989. Another kaleidoscope nation created out of the Versailles Treaty was Czechoslovakia, which didn't survive long the fall of the Iron Curtain and the withdrawal of Soviet armies of occupation. These were not creations of any natural forces. These were enforced from outside, as was the Union of South Africa. Nobody chose the Union of South Africa. The British government forced it on. Nobody had a referendum to choose. Transvaal, Free State were bludgeoned into it, and the Cape and Natal were just ordered into it. We were never asked, do we want to be part of this shotgun marriage with the Union of South Africa? The Union of South Africa was imposed by the British Empire. Why must we stick in what the Rothschilds wanted long after its purpose has passed? When I first visited Yugoslavia and heard people in Croatia speaking about the need for independence, I was highly skeptical. Yugoslavia consisted of 6 republics, 5 nations, 4 languages, 3 major religions, 2 alphabets, 1 political party, and there's their flag, this monster, ugly red star in the middle of it. In 1990, the first multi-party elections were held in Croatia. 25th of June 1991, Croatia declared independence, which came into effect 8th of October 1991. By 15 January 1992, Croatia was recognized as an independent country by the European Economic Community led by Germany. Germany was the first to recognize Croatia's independence. The aggression by Yugoslavia was effectively ended by August 1995, with a decisive victory by Croatia. 5 August has been observed as Victory in Homeland Thanksgiving Day since. In Slovenia, a group of intellectuals articulated the case for Slovene independence from 1987 in the magazine Nova Revija, and a Committee for the Defense of Human Rights was formed. Now, it's still a one-party communist dictatorship at this point. Demands for democratization and independence for Slovenia forced the communist government to enact a number of democratic reforms. In September 1989, constitutional amendments were passed to produce parliamentary democracy to Slovenia. On the 7th of March 1990, Slovenian Assembly changed the official name of the state to the Republic of Slovenia. April 1990, the first democratic elections in Slovenia took place, first ever. 23rd December 1990, more than 88% of the electorate voted in a referendum for sovereign, independent Slovenia. And they declared the independence 25th of June 1991. The Yugoslav People's Army invaded 27th of June 1991, which led to the 10-day war. I've also called the 9-day war, but 9 or 10-day war, it was over very quick. And the result was the Brijuni Agreement and the withdrawal of the Yugoslav army from Slovenia. December 1991, a new constitution was adopted, followed by laws on denationalization, privatization of all state enterprise by 1992. This is fast. From 1987 to 1992, complete independence recognized internationally, even by their previous oppressors, after an incredibly brief war. The members of the European Union recognized Slovenia as an independent state on 15 January 1992, with Austria being the first to recognize them. And so we now have 6 countries where there once was one, and a whole lot better for all the inhabitants at that. When I first traveled to Bratislava in Czechoslovakia, talk of the Slovakians seceding from Czechoslovakia just seemed unrealistic and impossible. I mean, to me, it was like talking about colonizing Mars or something. Not going to happen. The Christians were adamant that Slovakia must become an independent country. Indeed, following the collapse of communist rule in Czechoslovakia in 1989 and the withdrawal of the Soviet Red Army, the Slovak Socialist Republic was renamed the Slovak Republic. 17th of June 1992, Slovakia declared itself a sovereign state, meaning that its laws took precedence over those of the federal government. Throughout the autumn of 1992, negotiations with the Czech federal government resulted in a vote 31st of December 1992 to dissolve Czechoslovakia. The Slovak Republic and the Czech Republic went their separate ways after 1st of January 1993. And so they called this the Velvet Divorce, because no one died. 1993, peaceful referendum. The 2 countries are now happy neighbors because good fences make good neighbors. The overthrow of communist rule in Czechoslovakia had been called the Velvet Revolution because it was mostly accomplished without any violence. And the peaceful separation of Czech and Slovakia is called the Velvet Divorce. Then you get to the Baltic states. Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. 3 Baltic states which were occupied over the centuries by Sweden, which was once a superpower, Poland, which was once a very aggressive state, and Russia, of course. The Republic of Latvia was established 18 November 1918 when it seceded from the Soviet Union, just like Finland had done. In 1940, though, Latvia was invaded by the Soviet Union, and later Latvia was liberated by German forces during Operation Barbarossa in 1941, and many of them actually served in German army fighting throughout Operation Barbarossa against the Soviets. In 1944, the Soviet Red Army again invaded Latvia and forced it back into the Soviet Union. Starting in 1987, the Singing Revolution called for Baltic emancipation from communism and from Soviet occupation. And on the 4th of May 1990, the Declaration of the Restoration of Independence of the Republic of Latvia was issued. On 21st of August 1991, Latvia declared its independence. I mean, this is quite fast. This is extraordinary. Latvia has been declared the capital of culture in Europe, and its capital, Riga, has hosted the Choir Olympics, which Daniela, as part of the Cape Town Youth Choir, has been able to participate in. 140 choirs from around the world gathered in Riga for this event, and I believe the Stellenbosch University Choir won the category of sacred music, which is an extraordinary achievement. For this little Baltic republic to have gained this kind of prominence in such short time and freedom, absolutely extraordinary. Estonia was also occupied over the centuries by the Polish, the Swedish, and the Russian forces, declared its independence also in 1918, as the Bolsheviks were destroying Russia, and on the 6th of August 1940, invaded and occupied by Stalin's Soviet Red Army, incorporating the Soviet Union with a lot of brutality. Well, Estonians continued to resist the Soviet occupation for years. During the Second World War, of course, on the side of the Germans, afterwards, the Forest Brothers resistance movement opposed the Soviet policy of collectivization and forced removals of Estonians to make way for Russian immigration. Many Estonians were shipped off to the salt mines and to Siberia, exile and work in labor camps, and died in Siberia. But they fought in the bush. And by the way, I don't know if you can spot here with these men. These were some of the resistance fighters. Some of the picture looks a bit scratched and folded, but the weapons they're using here, weapons they've captured from the enemy, and they were fighting for 10 years after the Second World War. They were still fighting the Soviets. In 1987, the singing revolution began because they didn't have much resistance opportunity, so they started to revive their culture and sing, and this brought the people together. And it's very hard to say you're not allowed to sing. And so the Popular Front of Estonia became the standard bearer for Estonian independence. An Estonian National Defense Party was the first non-communist party in the Soviet Union. It demanded full restoration of independence. And they would gather to sing, and the candle became the symbol of resistance to communism back from the Leipzig movement, which started back in 1982. So the Leipzig prayer meeting was, they would come with candles, not lit, and then one would be lit, and then they'd light one another's candles. And the idea is, not all the darkness can put out the smallest light. Light is more powerful than darkness. Truth is more powerful than lies and error. And that communism is darkness, it's lies, it cannot survive simple light. A simple candle is more powerful than all the darkness. And so you'll see there, this is a sign of the protests throughout the whole of Eastern Europe, especially starting in Leipzig, but here in Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, they use the candles a lot. Estonia never joined the USSR. I mean, this was not a marriage. As I said, this is a rape. Estonia wants freedom from an abusive government. On the 16th of November 1988, the Estonian Supreme Soviet issued a sovereignty declaration asserting the primacy of Estonian laws over Soviet Union laws. This is very brave. I mean, this is when the Soviet Union is still in its heyday. In 1988, we were still fighting them in Angola. I mean, the hot part of the Cold War was still on, and they could have crushed them under their tanks. These are very brave people. 23rd of August 1989. I mean, this is while the Berlin Wall's collapsing, and all over Eastern Europe, there's all kinds of eruptions. 2 million Estonians, Latvians, and Lithuanians participated in a mass demonstration. We have a life chain. Well, they had a Baltic Way human chain with 2 million people across 3 republics. Here you can see the line of the Baltic chain. Along the side of the road, see the nice old cars from Ladas and Moscoviches back from it looks like they're made in 1950s. But these would be 1980s cars, as 1980, and demanded restoration. So singing and peaceful protest was their way. In 1990, the Congress of Estonia was formed as a representative body of Estonian citizens, and in March 1991, a referendum was held where 77% of voters supported independence. You wonder what on earth was wrong with the other 33%. A Moscow coup attempt was exposed and resisted, and Estonia declared its restoration of independence 20th of August 1990, which is now a national holiday in Estonia. The last units of the Red Army only left Estonia in 1994, so they continued to act as an independent country even while the Red Army was occupying them, and it took a few years before the Russians said, you know, we might as well just leave, we're not wanted here anymore. And they got the message ultimately. And these are wonderful people. You can ask Daniela, she's visited these places. So 1992, Estonia launched economic reforms for privatization and free market economy, and in 2004 they actually joined the European Union and NATO. And you can see the Baltic people, you may wonder, well, why don't they just make one country instead of 3? Because they're different people. They descended from Germanic, Viking, Swedish, Finnish, and other peoples, but they've got their own language and culture. Now, Estonia and Latvia are overwhelmingly Protestant. Lithuania is mostly Catholic. So, coming to Lithuania. Lithuania seceded from the Soviet Union 16th February 1918 to form the Republic of Lithuania. 1940, like its brother states, invaded by the Soviet Red Army of Stalin, and they also joined with and supported Germany in Operation Barbarossa in freeing their country from the Soviets. occupation, and then they were crushed again in 1945 when the communists came in. On 11th of March 1990, a year before the formal dissolution of the Soviet Union, Lithuania became the first Baltic republic to declare itself independent. 11th of March 1990, a full year before the dissolution, Lithuania became the first state to declare independence. And so at that point, the Supreme Council announced the restoration of the independence, and on 28th of March, the Soviet Union imposed an economic blockade in Lithuania. This blockade lasted 74 days. But Lithuania stood firm. You can imagine, total lockdown, nothing allowed to be imported, exported, border frozen, but the people stood firm. And the Soviet Union attempted a coup in Lithuania. They stormed the Seimas Palace, and Lithuanians vigorously defended their council, inspired other Soviet republics to secede from the Union. So they did a very brave, bold work of resistance. You can see the people who are resisting the Soviet tanks. P-76 is coming in there. Shortly after 11th of February 1991, the Parliament of Iceland voted to confirm Iceland's 1922 recognition of Lithuanian independence. They said, we don't need to recognize them. Our recognition of 1922 stands in effect. We never formally recognized the Soviet Union's occupation of Lithuania. And what it takes for independence to work in terms of international laws, you need one other sovereignly recognized country to recognize the independence of that country. And so Iceland was effectively the first to say, to be brave enough to say, Lithuania is independent, sending our ambassador over. And that started domino effects. Others, most people aren't willing to be the first, but they might be willing to follow. Iceland stated full diplomatic relations should be re-established as soon as possible. On the 25th of October 1992, the citizens of Lithuania voted in a referendum to adopt their new constitution. So these are the three states. You've got Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia. 31st of August 1993, the last units of the Russian army finally withdrew from Lithuanian territory. It took them a while to get the message, but finally they left peacefully. Since 2004, Lithuania has become a member of NATO and the European Union, and these are others who've joined the European Union since Cyprus and Malta, and of course we've mentioned many of these others, but Hungary was another story. Well, since 1995, I've been involved in a campaign for South Sudan's independence. From 1995 to 2002, I conducted 27 missions into Sudan, delivering 500,000 Bibles and books in 24 languages throughout South Sudan and the Nuba Mountains. And during this time, I had at least 1,200 meetings inside Sudan, another 1,000 meetings, TV and radio programs internationally to campaign for Sudan's independence. And this involved writing the book Faith and Defiant Sudan, and the third edition is 3 times the size of the first edition, which came out in 1996. I brought in filmmakers like Pat Matrician of Jeremiah Films. He produced Sudan in the Holocaust, Terrorism, Persecution, and assisted Samaritans to produce their first films on Sudan, which helped them establish the hospital pioneered by Dr. Fraser in Lui. Now, initially, even the leaders of the Sudanese People's Liberation Army, the SPLA, were skeptical that the map could ever be redrawn, as the African Union had resisted all changes to the borders delineated in the Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885. I strenuously argued with Colonel John Garang, who's the man second from the left here. He is the leader and founder of the SPLA, and with Commander Silva Kiir, the man third from left, who is now, by the way, the president of South Sudan. But at that time, he was second commander of the SPLA, and they argued it'll never happen. It's not possible. All we can hope for is autonomy. We can't ever get independence. And I argued with them that only independence for South Sudan could secure their freedom and their future. They would just be an oppressed black Christian minority in an Arab Muslim country unless they redraw the map. And redraw the map to South Sudan where they are a majority, where blacks and Christians are the majority. Otherwise, they'll be just oppressed by the Muslim Arabs. You have to redraw the map for the sake of peace. And I argued this with them, and they were, it'll never happen. It's not possible. Berlin Conference, maps never been redrawn. The African Union will never accept it. Missionaries had actually pleaded with Great Britain in 1955, do not include the black Christians and animists of South Sudan into an Arab-ruled Sudan. They made suggestions, incorporate Equatoria into Kenya or Uganda, but to no avail. From the very first day of independence, for the 1st of January 1956, even as the British were bringing down their flag and the Sudanese were putting their flag up, the war was in full swing between the Muslim North and the Christian South. The North sought to Arabize and Islamize the South with brutal oppression, great devastation, and loss of life. And it started, in fact, with the Equatorial Corps down in Juba. Equatorial Corps was ordered to bring in your weapons and stack them in the armory, and to get onto the train unarmed and go to the north. And they said, we know you Arabs. You've always treated us as slaves. We're the guardians of the South. We're not handing in our rifles. And we're not going to get in any train to go to the north. And that's when the war started. And one of my friends up there, Canon Reuben, he was Equatorial Corps at the time. He still has his cap from Equatorial Corps. They said, we fired the first shots of the war. We killed the Arab officers and started Ananya 1, or the War for Independence that started in 1955, actually. That's even before the British had totally left. Because, in fact, they said at independence, when the British left, of the 800 officials running South Sudan, 796 were Muslim Arabs from the north. There were only 4 blacks, and they were all Muslims too, mind you, from the south. We were being colonized in our own country. We were not even allowed to have our own representatives, district commissioners, police chiefs, the whole lot. And so the war started right there. The Arabs immediately, Friday's the day of rest, Sunday's a day for school and the markets and so on, and Arabic's the language. You're not allowed to speak your own language and things like this. And it was just vicious war. And I showed from Sudan's history and from the teachings of Islam why the only way to be free of Sharia law and Arab oppression is to fight for independence and sovereignty of South Sudan and the Nuba Mountains. Although they were highly skeptical that this was at all possible, today South Sudan is an independent country, recognized internationally. And Salva Kiir, standing in the middle here with the red beret next to me, at that point in 2001, he was still arguing with me, it'll never happen. Well, 10 years later, he was president of South Sudan. And Salva Kiir has been its president since 9th of July 2011. And the theme of that independence campaign was, let my people go. And the symbol was for secession, the hand up, enough, a black hand, enough of the Arabs. And this was in 2005, they had their referendum on whether they would get independence. And the people voted overwhelmingly. It was in the 89% for independence. And it's the sign that they'd voted. And so this is the polling stations for the referendum, 2005. And 2011, because they wanted a cooling off period of 6 years before independence would actually happen to allow for, and it was mostly peaceful and so on. And so this is the scene in Juba, independence. This, by the way, is a Mi-8 HIP helicopter, same kind of helicopter I was captured in Mozambique in 1989, Soviet manufacture. And the Sudanese love their crosses. These are some of the war veterans. Now, these are real veterans who fought a real war without legs, amputees who've lost limbs to the landmines and the fighting at the time. And I never saw them like this in this kind of uniform when I was there, let alone with gloves. And here's Salva Kiir, the president of South Sudan, on Independence Day, and he's wearing this lovely Texan hat. And you wonder where that Texan hat comes from? George Bush Jr. George Bush welcomed Salva Kiir to his farm in Texas and gave him this hat, and he wears it like a crown since. And this is the most popular fashion accessory now in South Sudan. All the South Sudan men like to have Texas hats, so this is a whole new culture that's been brought in there. And lifting up their constitution, and to think that, by the way, that's interesting, just behind us, Franklin Graham, and I managed to ambush Franklin Graham to get him involved in this work, because after going to Sudan in 1996, the people had said to me, you must help us with hospital. Now, the first thing they asked for was Bibles, which I brought in from 1995 on, and I said, we need a hospital. There's not a hospital for 8 million people. So a man's got to know his limitations. I'm not medical. What do I know about that? But I knew Samaritan's Purse. I'd been with him in Rwanda, and I'd seen what's happened in Rwanda, that all the medical groups left. Red Cross, Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders, they're all out left. During the Holocaust in Rwanda, the only medical group there was Samaritan's Purse. And I was with them. I was in their hospital that they were cleaning out, putting on overalls, Wellington boots, crawling into the drains and clearing out the body parts. There were 8,000 human corpses in this one hospital in Kigali. And the entire plumbing was clogged. And to break up the congealed blood and to enable the drainage to work, it was a filthy business. And you cannot imagine how many, not thousands, hundreds of thousands of rats there were. Rats everywhere, all big rats bigger than our cats. And there were rats all over, and at night we'd be in this place and they had all kinds of rat traps around, and every now and then you'd hear a rat trap clamp and there'd be a chair throughout the whole house. And one night I remember this one woman who had a pathological fear of rats, and for some reason she chose the top bunk, thinking the top bunk was the best way to be free of rats. Well, it's the worst place to be, because the rat came through the roof onto this poor American woman, and she woke up screaming. We were running there thinking she was under attack. Meanwhile, it was only a rat that was nibbling on her. And we'd literally sleep with a mag light and a machete. We'd be batting away rats at night while trying to sleep. Well, I knew Franklin Graham's the man. Let's get Samaritan's Purse into Sudan. So I wrote to his office and I got a polite letter back. Sorry, busy, overcommitted, not possible. So I'm thinking about this, and next thing, what lands on my desk? A beautiful gilt embossed white envelope and openness embossed thing. Here's a card with gilt in it. The Mayor of Cape Town invites you to a prayer breakfast, so the special guest speaker will be Franklin Graham. Franklin Graham coming to Cape Town. He's going to speak at an evangelistic rally in Newlands cricket grounds, which my dad used to run, and I've got an invitation to the Mayor's prayer breakfast. Well, what a deal. So I wrote again and I asked for, is there possible to get a meeting with Franklin Graham when he comes to Cape Town and so on? Not possible, overcommitted, so on and so forth. And that's when I got this invitation. So I made sure I was there really early, parked my motorbike right up where the City Hall was, went inside, and with my helmet over my arm, and there's Franklin Graham and the Mayor standing at the door. And I might have been the first day, and as I shook his hand and said, Franklin Graham, I believe you also motorbike. And he beamed and said, yes, I've got a Harley Davidson. I said, I believe you've also been involved in training chaplains for the Contra rebels in Nicaragua. And he said, yes, I have. I said, I've been doing that with Renamo in Mozambique and Unita in Angola. Mr. Graham, I've got one question for you. Why is Samaritan's Purse not in Sudan? He was a bit defensive. He said, well, we have been in Sudan. I said, Upper Nile 4 years ago. And he said, well, we found the people unreliable and we couldn't work with them. I said, you were working with Riek Machar's crowd. They're surrogates for the Arab government. He said, I didn't know that. I said, I know just the place for you to work, the people who you can trust. In the oldest hospital in southern Sudan, it's abandoned right now, but was planted by the first missionary to South Sudan, Kenneth Fraser. Mr. Graham, give me a team. Let's get Samaritan's Purse in South Sudan. Now, at this point, there's a queue of people lining up behind. So he said, I'll speak to you later. And he did. He came, found my desk where I was, and he said, this is Mr. Ken Isaacs. He's in charge of my operations team. Explain to him your vision. So I sat down with Ken Isaacs, who initially was hands folded, leaning back, legs crossed, real negative body language. But after a few pictures and stories, he's leaning forward, looking through my photo albums and really interested. Well, 2 days later, I get a phone call saying, Franklin's given the green light. We need you to take our team in 2 days from now. I've got programs, I've got commitments. And he said, Peter, you've got a green light. Go through the intersection. Okay, cancel everything. Off to Kenya, took the team in, and there's a whole lot of amazing things that happened to make it really work. But they came in within weeks after that, and they got set up, and they were there for years. In fact, Franklin Graham said, we never are in any place longer than 6 months. Samaritan's Purse is short term. We seldom commit to more than 3 months. We've never committed to more than 3 months before, but we'll commit to 6 months in South Sudan. Well, they were there for 10 years. They performed over 200 operations. And they really made the blind to see with cataract surgery and a whole lot of great things. And at one point I said, so what happened to we never anywhere more than 6 months? And just like 2 years later, he said, well, it's your fault, he says. We've got so much designated funding from the films that were made that we're going to be here for years. In fact, in the end, to get out of Sudan, Samaritan's Purse built over 250 churches for churches that had been bombed, with funds that had been designated for Sudan, because they had to finish the designated money so they could move on to other projects. They had so much that was designated. I think it was in the millions, $6 million or something, designated for South Sudan. Don't know why we can't raise that money for our work. But anyway, Samaritan's Purse Hospital got involved there, and Franklin Graham was personal friends with George Bush. And in fact, Franklin Graham did the prayer inauguration for the president at the inauguration of George Bush. And so he was the ideal man to take their concerns directly to the President of America, and a whole lot of interesting things started to roll from there. This picture says a lot. A man who's lost both his hands, probably chopped off by the Arabs, raising his hands or his stumps in praise to God for independence. From today, our identity is Southern and African, not Arabic and Islamic. We're not worse Arabs, but we're better Africans. Their own flag, their own army, and this is at the first anniversary of their independence. And South Sudan has its problems still, of course, but it's free and it's independent and it's recognized, and they're no longer under Sharia law, and they have their own identity, their own seal, their own currency, and they are free at last. The story's not over, because since then they've discovered oil in South Sudan, which you could be sure the map would not have left that in South Sudan if they'd known it ahead of time. And just by sheer coincidence, there's war and destabilization around where the oil fields are. I must say, oil is a curse. The sooner we can get into alternatives, the better, because honestly, the amount of wars caused by oil, it's just like, as Paul Kruger said, it's a curse that we had diamonds and gold in our republics, or we might have stayed free. These things actually aren't a blessing. The amount of problems they bring with them. That's another story. But we must still pray for South Sudan, and we still are working for South Sudan. Today we continue to campaign for the freedom and independence of the Nuba Mountains, an island of Christianity and the Sea of Islam. They were not included in the agreement or the peace with South Sudan because they're a bit further north. And so the Nuba Mountains is continuing to be a major focus of our mission. The courageous Nuba Christians continue to resist the Arabization and the Islamization policies of the Khartoum government, and redrawing the map is absolutely essential to recognize the ethno-linguistic, demographic realities and to avoid further loss of life and future conflict. And at this moment, there's a ceasefire in place. In fact, there's been a ceasefire in place since Donald Trump came to power, because he put pressure on the Sudanese government and said, I know what you want, free trade and sanctions lifted. Let me tell you what I want. No more hostile actions, no bombings, no offensives against Nuba Mountains in South Kordofan, the Blue Nile, or in Darfur. And they did. And before you knew it, they overthrew their dictator. Omar al-Bashir had been in power for almost 30 years, put him on trial, promising to hand him over to the International Court of Justice for his genocide and all the rest. And now the government of Sudan is actually passing laws banning whipping, banning flogging, decriminalizing what they call apostasy, where a Muslim would convert to Christianity and so on. So there's a lot of interesting things. They've signed peace treaties with the Nuba. So there hasn't been any bombing for the last almost 5 years, 4.5 years in the Nuba Mountains. And there's peace for a lot of work that can be done. So we must not continue to follow in the footsteps of failure. Centralization in a unitary state is as doomed to failure as the Tower of Babel. As you can see, Bruegel's classic portrait of the Tower of Babel, mimicked by the European Union in their poster, Europe, many tongues, one voice. How blatant is that? And even their parliament built like a Tower of Babel, even incomplete with the scaffolding. We need to rather emulate examples of excellence, such as the decentralized model of Switzerland and the free enterprise model of Singapore. The Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885, also known as the Congo Conference or the West African Conference, sought to avoid conflict by regulating European protectorates and colonies in Africa to effectively eradicate the slave trade and to avoid conflict between European powers. The European powers also gathered at this conference were seeking to prevent rising American, Russian, Japanese encroachments on Africa. They couldn't see far enough to see that China would be doing it, but it wasn't only negative. There was a positive side. They wanted to end the slave trade. They wanted to develop Africa. They wanted to avoid conflict. And to a large extent, they were pretty successful. However, due to lack of information and very incomplete understanding of the realities of Africa, often borders were drawn along lines of longitude and latitude, or utilizing a river. But communities live on both sides of the same river frequently. You know, imagine if you made the Rhine the border, or the Danube the border, or the Mississippi. There's same people on both sides of the river. You can't just make an arbitrary river the border. And so that doubtless wasn't fully realized at the time. However, in my missionary work, it's become clear that the map needs to be redrawn. Half the Shangaan people live in Mozambique and speak Portuguese. The other half live in South Africa and speak English. Half the Ivamba people live in Angola, where they've learned Portuguese and they drive on the right-hand side of the road. The other half live in Southwest Africa, Namibia, learning Afrikaans or English, driving on the left-hand side of the road, and in different time zones, despite being north and south of one another. The Chichewa people are divided between Malawi, Zambia, and Mozambique. And you could continue this throughout Africa. The maps do not reflect the geopolitical or the ethno-linguistic realities of Africa. And the greatest conflicts in Africa, like the Biafran Civil War in Nigeria, devastating. Millions of people died in it. In the Congo Wars, something in the region of 12 million people died in the Great Lakes Wars in 1990s in the Congo. And the long conflict in Sudan. All of this could have been averted if the maps had reflected demographic realities and not forced people to be minorities in their own country, oppressed by other cultures, tribes, or religions. And so you just look at this and you can see there's a massive diversity of people in different parts of Africa. And you can also see how Western Cape is demographically very different from the rest of Africa. It's inexcusable that since independence, the Organization of African Unity has steadfastly refused to allow maps to be redrawn. Now, the apparent exception is Eritrea, but Eritrea was a separate entity, and they were only forced to be part of Abyssinia after the Second World War, after South Africa helped liberate Abyssinia, then from the Italians. The British then decided to force Eritrea, which had been under the Italians, to join Abyssinia, which had never been a colony of anyone, and make them one country, Ethiopia. And that just led to non-stop war from 1945 to 1991, when the Eritreans finally won their freedom again. So redrawing the maps and recognizing the independence of South Sudan was a monumentally important precedent. It's not like Eritrea, which was just reverting back to what was the Berlin Conference originally. And so here we are in the Cape. Cape Town's history goes back to 1652. Now, just a few years ago, the Kingdom of Zululand celebrated 200 years of the Kingdom of Zululand. That's a wonderful achievement. The Cape has got almost 4 centuries history of a unique cultural mix in the Cape. And the oldest building in the Southern Hemisphere is the castle. And it just reminds us, before there was a shack where they today have Joburg or Pretoria, Cape Town was an established entity with a tremendous culture and civilization. We have the oldest windmill in the Southern Hemisphere, dating back to the 1700s. The Cape has got its own culture. And therefore, Cape Exit has been gathering a lot of support. There's something in the region right now of over 820,000 people have already signed up with Cape Exit under the slogan of Free the Cape. And to have a canton system, a decentralized system of the Cape. There is a party dedicated to Cape independence, the Cape Party. Don't just hope for a better life, vote for one. And instead of continuing to support the corruption and nepotism that's going on in this city, even from the DA, who can only say that, look, we're better than the ANC. Well, yes, but they're not as good as they should be. You know, next to the ANC, everyone can look good. We deserve better in Cape Town than what the DA is doing, or what we call a DANC. And even Elizabeth endorses a fresh approach in our votes. So the Cape Party is running in this upcoming municipal election. That's an opportunity for us to give a vote for independence. I think we should join Cape Exit. We should vote to secede from the communist-controlled ANC. For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? Though an army may encamp against me, my heart shall not fear. Though war may arise against me, in this I will be confident. Free the Cape, Cape Exit. And you'll notice outside we have made our stand by flying the Cape Independence Movement flag with the anchor.